Let Earth observe their ghosts. The rest of us have systems to govern. The words fell without hesitation, landing with the bite of polished arrogance. Veilen didn't whisper. He projected, his voice carried across the stone-walled tiered chamber like a sharpened thread, slicing through the silence that followed the memorial toll. Earth's delegation stood motionless at the base of the quorum floor, beneath 30 spiraled balconies of alien observers. Every figure wore ceremonial drapes, chroma-coded to their house or alliance, all except the Terrans. No sigils, no colors, just uncrested black coats, fastened at the collar with matte obsidian clasps, smooth, undecorated, and unblinking. At the center, Vern Sulik didn't lift his head. His right hand remained placed over the flat communion plate, an ancient rite of mourning originally adopted by Concord to mark multilateral losses. The plate dimmed as the cycle completed. No response, no light, the acknowledgement of grief, denied. Jernik leaned forward against the embedded crescent of his throne, talons softly tapping the edge of his control slate. The council seal above him rippled once, refracted by a shifting lens calibration error. No one corrected it. They mourn silence, he muttered, but bring no names, no reaction, not from Vern, not from the other 6 Terran envoys behind him. They stood in a staggered wedge, eyes lowered, expressions unreadable, not frozen, but calculatedly still. One delegate blinked slower than necessary. Another's jaw tensed and eased, subtle movements, timed too perfectly to be instinct. The ceiling panels adjusted to reflect Verdanus Prime's ceremonial alignment. Across the chamber, pale red and blue slats rotated into place, casting a grid of diagonal light over the floor. The chamber quieted further, tension feathering across the top row of seats like static. The ceremonial envoy from Quarthus leaned toward Veilen. "They never respond, you know," he said through bared ridges. "Even when my delegation desecrated their code stone last cycle." Silence. Veilen bared his teeth, then let the silence carry this. He stood, walked 2 steps down to the decree lectern, and placed one clawed hand on the slab. "I motion that Earth's observance today be stricken from the Council archive, on grounds of symbolic vacancy. They brought no documentation, no artifacts, no testimony. Ritual without memory serves no purpose." He paused. No memory, no record, no right. The moment stretched. Then from the mezzanine tier, a soft stuttering exhale came, from a translator node recalibrating itself to Vern's input language, only to receive no statement at all. Sulik lifted his hand from the communion plate. He turned, not quickly, not slowly, just enough to be deliberate. One by one, the other Terrans mirrored his movement. They did not face Veilen, they did not speak, they did not glance up at the tiers that loomed over them like predator nests. They began walking, no cue, no command. Their movement lacked synchronization, because it didn't need it. A march implies intent. This was something else, non-engagement codified. As they crossed the seal-etched floor, several envoys attempted to stand, likely to issue counter-statements. None did. Something in the rhythm of those departing steps, their spacing, the unnatural echo they left in their wake, seemed to dampen declarations before they formed. A Concord aide whispered to another, "Are they withdrawing from vote?" The reply came from a data stream, not a voice. Heads-up displays flickered. The Terran Registry entry beneath the event log, observance code 7, Veit, updated, not redacted, not flagged, voided, and not by the Council. The chamber doors unlocked without being summoned, their pressure seals disengaged with no signal. Only the Terrans moved through. The path cleared on its own. As they stepped through, a faint vibration passed through the chamber's light lattice grid, barely noticeable, but enough for high-sensitivity delegates to flinch. Several shifted uneasily in their tiered perches. Veilen's upper crest stiffened as he turned to his aide. "Explain that relay echo." "No signal recorded," the aide said, eyes fixed on his wrist slate, but the Terran delegation's diplomatic ident frames updated mid-motion. Veilen narrowed his gaze. Updated to what? Non-aligning. A flicker of something passed through the chamber's upper grid, a subtle dimming. One light strand along the west wall dropped half an interval, and stabilized again. No alarms sounded, no correction tags flagged. It corrected nothing, because it assumed nothing had gone wrong. Outside, through the transparent archways that framed the council dome. Verdanus Prime's upper skyline rolled with slow convective cloud tides, corrosive moisture drifting against the filtration barrier. The light diffused through the droplets, tinting the walkways in broken layers of violet and rust. A drone floated near the hallway boundary. As the Terran delegation approached, it deviated trajectory, not by force, but by preemption. Earth's envoy didn't even acknowledge it. The drone logged its own repositioning under the tag, Civic Courtesy Override, Tier X Clearance. Inside the chamber, Veilen returned to his seat. He didn't lean back. He didn't smirk again. His fingers tapped once, too softly to be intentional, too loud to be missed. Curious, he muttered. The counselor from Yevon Tor cleared his throat. What is? They left before the motion passed. They always leave early. Veilen didn't reply. Above them, the central seal refracted again. This time, the distortion remained. The colors bled slightly toward the periphery of the dome, as if unable to center. Down in the observation pit, a junior protocol scribe blinked at his terminal. "Sir," he said toward his cluster chief, "the registry layer just shifted. How? I don't know. Earth's entry reclassified their delegation as legacy accessors. That's not a rank. It's not even a category." Back on the departure platform, Vern Sulik paused at the first transit bridge. He did not look back. His hand hovered over the interface panel. The light beneath his palm flickered in a slow spiral, then pulsed flat blue. The door opened. A breeze moved through the hallway behind them, not from environmental displacement, but from pressure adjustment. Yet the air didn't feel warm or cold. It felt absent, the way empty rooms feel after something has been removed too cleanly, as if the shape of a thing remained, but not the thing itself. As the door closed, no sound marked it, just a gap resealing. Inside the chamber, Veilen turned to the center seal and issued the archival deletion order. Purge event timestamp 4V black. Memorial observance incomplete. His aide hesitated. "Sir, the purge function isn't accepting authority." "Why not?" The aide blinked twice. "It says the timestamp is still active." Veilen's expression stiffened. "Impossible." The aide tapped again. "It says the moment is ongoing." From above, a new data line appeared on the master display. Clause reference queued. Haid 9. No one knew what that meant. Not yet. But the Terrans were already gone. "Pull the full build trace. Root frame to sublayer." Director Neth Olvian's voice cut across the chamber like a micro-fracture in polished stone. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Every analyst on Tier 7 of the Concord Legal Archives adjusted their posture, fingers twitching over encrypted slabs and query rods. One mistimed blink, and the audit would miss the cross-verification stamp. Again. At the center table, Drav Voshin's slate glowed with reassembly nodes, layer upon layer of system inheritance codes, spiraling outward from a Terran tag block, last seen 71 cycles ago. His tongue flicked against his back molars, grounding his nerves in sensation as data chains assembled, unfurled, then spliced back into knots. "They weren't supposed to retain interpretation rights," Voshin muttered, tapping one entry 3 times. Clause 3V of the Infrastructure Exchange limits originator access to coordination nodes. Olvian stepped closer, casting a shadow over the center projection. "Not if it's Lexicon bound." Voshin froze. Lexicon bound overrides council permissions. That's why Earth wrote it. The audit chamber thrummed beneath the floor, not with noise, but with current displacement, old coolant chambers, bleeding residual charge from decades dormant storage stacks. Their scent filtered through the air vents. Hot rust, aged insulation, deep-sealed carbon rot. Old architecture doesn't scream when it fails. It seeps back into relevance through neglect. The system expanded again. Node tags fanned outward, gravity modulation anchors, thermal synchronization hubs, light core balancing grids, all bearing the same origin key, Earth Lex RTK. "Give me treaty logs from the Halvanar recalibration incident," Olvian ordered. "Council back-channel session, red security layer. It'll be under internal deadlock authorization." Voshin's screen trembled faintly before updating. Found. The transcript unfolded as if ashamed of its own age. The language was stilted, formal, ceremonial. Deliberation after infrastructure collapse on the Halvanar outposts. Terran engineers proposed a reliable redundancy framework to stabilize orbital spin delays and shield harmonics. Back then, Concord had no unified fallback system. Earth offered theirs. The Council accepted it. Without redlining, without reclassification, the entire framework went live with 0 amendments, and buried beneath its subclause stack sat a ceremonial footnote. Clause Haid 9. Olvian tilted his head. Mark that clause with cross-reference anchors. See who approved it. The system lagged, then responded. 38 counselors, 12 abstained, 1 opposition. Presiding officer, Jernik Veilen. Voshin exhaled through his nose. He ratified the clause he just triggered. History, Olvian said, has a longer reach than ambition. The clause packet expanded. It displayed Terran syntax in flattened treaty Latin, rendered through base code enclosures and non-branching recursion logic. Voshin narrowed his eyes as he scanned it line by line. Clause Haid 9, Interpretive Sovereignty Clause. In the event of ritual-based invalidation of Terran dignity by a signatory member during observance protocol, all Earth origin infrastructure will default to last Lexicon authenticated state, enforced via silent root frame reversion. This is not war. This is structural inheritance. Voshin tapped the laurel stamp embedded at the bottom. The seal pulsed, not with animation, but through refractive layering. A burn-in watermark, bonded to Treaty Layer 2 entries, beneath overwrite permissions. No one removed it. Voshin murmured. They couldn't. Olvian reached for his data rod and slotted it into the chamber's central deck. The laser plasma display realigned to pull cross-sector schematics. Lines of connectivity formed a mesh, thin, irregular but constant, linking Terran seed frames across multiple Concord territories. Every node carried a header, interpretive authority, retained override channel, none registered fallback trigger, dormant. What did we call this back then? Voshin asked without looking away. The framework, Olvian answered without hesitation. Temporary backbone. He pointed at the active relay list. Then no one ever turned it off. Across the left column, old diagnostics logs surfaced. An incident on Veltherin core, where a cooling tower's fusion plate drifted out of phase, was resolved not by local intervention, but by a self-correcting Terran gravity script. That script was 20 cycles obsolete, yet it ran, and it worked. Next column, stasis vault containment at Jastanar cradle, fail-safe activated during a power black loss, rerouted through Earth's legacy pattern match. No recognition protocol, just compliance. Voshin leaned in closer. We haven't just been using Earth's designs, we've been inside them, and never once audited the schema layer. Olvian's expression didn't shift. You don't audit what you believe you own. Voshin swallowed. We misfiled Terran architecture as modular. It's lexicon dependent. It doesn't function without their syntax authority. Exactly, Olvian said. Because it wasn't a donation, it was a licensed environment. The screens rotated, symbol clusters formed a phrase, CLSH9, active readiness, passive. The clause was alive, waiting, no activation signal required. It simply monitored events for qualifying conditions, like a judicial seed dormant in legal soil, triggered not by aggression, but by cultural invalidation. Voshin rubbed his temples. Why encode a protocol that responds to humiliation? Because Earth understood the difference between war and insult. A secondary screen lit up with a low-priority recall. The Terran delegation had updated its registry to non-aligning observer, interspatial legacy entity, a term not used since pre-Concord negotiation. Olvian turned away from the screen. They've already stepped outside the system. You think they're retaliating? No, Olvian said, voice low. They're obeying their own rules. Ours just aren't sufficient anymore. In the lower alcove, a junior aide stepped into the chamber, his uniform streaked with lint from archive scroll rebinds. He held a tablet with a trembling hand. Sir, new update from Interlink Trainary. Olvian didn't take the tablet. Say it. Grav Ring 14B on Kasker Station rebooted itself. Defaulted to Earth time-stamped calibration logs. Logged override request denied by non-existent authority. Voshin closed his eyes. It doesn't recognize us. The aide nodded. It recognizes Terran signature markers only. It's asking for lexicon alignment verification. We don't have the schema. Another tremor buzzed the flooring. This one had rhythm, a cycle, a pulse. Olvian finally turned. That's not decay. No, Voshan answered with clarity laced in dread. It's synchronization. They stood over the audit table in silence, watching the center seal flicker once more, aligning its spin to an older format. Not broken, not infected, just remembering. And across the infrastructure Earth once gave, the real backbone stirred, not with rebellion, but with inheritance, the kind that activates only when forgotten, and the galaxy had just begun to misalign. Query failed again. That's the fifth one. It's looping fallback without flagging. Bronek SOV didn't look up from his console. The brightness from the heads-up display tinted his cheeks green, mapping fine sweat lines that hadn't been there an hour ago. The command deck of Arist Station was sterile by design. Cool flooring, crisp airflow, no curve without function, but something in the rhythm of the room felt misaligned now. The panels blinked with calculated symmetry, yet his gut screamed interruption. He rerouted diagnostics through junction 14C and parsed the error codes. Node D ping lost, route invalid, syntax table mismatch, default path enabled, Earth RTKP2 referenced. He blinked. Earth routing tables? Those hadn't been active in years, at least, not officially. He leaned back slightly, pressing his spine against the ridged support of the interface chair. The contact chilled him, sweat already pooling beneath his shoulder blades. Across the chamber, a colleague dragged a gloved palm across a vertical slab to stabilize heat flow readings. Seamless, normal, on paper. But the pathways, they were different now, rewriting themselves. Check thermal grids, Bronek said aloud. Control pass on relay sectors 8 through 13. Don't use the automated pull, go manual. The technician across from him frowned. We just calibrated those this morning. Bronek narrowed his eyes. Do it again. The man turned without arguing. The central display flickered once. Not a surge, not a reboot, but a hesitation, like something remembering how it was meant to behave. Then the anomaly resurfaced. Not in the power bands, not in coolant regulation, in identity verification. One by one, subroutine packets marked Terran origin infrastructure, passive license active began logging requests. Not execution commands, permissions, as if systems across Arist were asking Earth for alignment. The timestamp reference on all of them, 49 years old. Why would dormant fallback patterns sync to deprecated schema? Bronek muttered. Who reauthorized their tag set? His hand hovered over the emergency link to Central Command. He didn't tap it yet, not without another data point. The last thing he wanted was to ping panic across 5 decks for a bug buried in leftover routing logic. He pulled up environmental isolation logs, standard precautionary review. Rows of green status codes scrolled, then halted. Auto Defense Grid 4B ping ghost target, ID source, Earth impossible, Bronek whispered. There had been no Terran ships in this quadrant since the last Concord realignment. No beacons, no hardware tags, and yet, defense logic had reacted, activated its threat assessment cascade, then reset itself, as if confused by its own aggression. He keyed into the grid log and found the trace route. It hadn't responded to a ship. It had reacted to a protocol signature embedded in empty space, a packet made of compressed Lexicon code, bouncing along shield harmonics like a mirror echo. No source, no coordinates, just shape. As Bronek watched, the same pattern hit the nearby orbital port. The outer navnet blinked once, then rerouted all incoming cargo vessels using a template that hadn't existed on file in 2 decades. Ship ident streams scattered like birds startled mid-flight, not malfunctioning, resorting themselves through Terran fallback arcs. Get me a live run on port control's beacon logs, he said sharply. One of the junior officers turned, hesitant. That's handled by Concord Interlink. We don't. Bronek slammed a palm against the edge of his console. I don't care who governs the switch. Trace the relay, now. The officer paled, then obeyed. Across the primary screen, a cascade of timestamps burst into view, none aligned. Every signal was off by at least 3 intervals. Some ran backward, others duplicated old coordinates from abandoned orbital plates. The worst simply refused synchronization altogether, defaulting to Earth's timestamp catalog as the master log. The station vibrated slightly, not a shake, not an impact, something deeper, like rhythm discord. the internal memory of systems diverging from their parent script and not knowing where to go. On the secondary screen, a civilian transport spun mid-drift outside Dock 6. Its guidance core reported no malfunction, but its trajectory had shifted by 6 degrees, gradual, invisible, until it wasn't. Override its pathing, Bronick ordered. Another officer tried. His fingers danced across the input table. Override refused, he said, blinking fast. By what? The heads-up display answered for him. Override denied. Missing anchor. Awaiting Terran signature. Bronick turned slowly. Get me fleet control. Now. Priority red. There was no panic in his voice, but everyone heard the lack of breath between his syllables. No connection formed. The relay chain had disassembled itself without alert. Roads still lit, but they didn't connect to anything, like a highway still showing open lanes, while every exit vanished. Bronick reached for the hard-link node. Manual key bypass, uninterruptible. It opened with delay. Inside, packet logs stuttered. Instead of updating, they showed frozen frames from legacy Terran systems, headers tagged with the old Earth seal, Laurel Ring, Iron World, unspoken anchor phrase beneath. Director, someone whispered. Bronick turned, expecting a new malfunction. Instead, the man pointed to the environmental status board. The auto-cycle timer was running reverse, not ticking down to reset, rebuilding from an earlier baseline. And then the final insult arrived, system-wide, across every interface, every terminal, and every auxiliary relay. Invalid anchor detected, fallback route engaged status, waiting for Terran verification. The words didn't flash, they didn't scream, they just appeared. Bronick stood in the silence that followed, then spoke, low and deliberate. They're not attacking us. Someone behind him choked out a question. Then what is this? Bronick didn't answer right away. He stared at the phrase repeating across the screen, calm, patient, inevitable. They're reminding us, he said, at last, that we never stopped using what they gave, and now systems were simply asking to be recognized. Again. Play it again. From the moment Veilen speaks, the command hung in the air like condensation in a sealed chamber. Evren Morsque stood at the center of Earth's Black Council vault, a rectangular room carved from obsidian composite, sound-absorbent and optically neutral. No display frames lined the walls, no chairs waited for comfort. Only one recessed terminal stood in the center, and a single laser plasma display hovered above it, projecting the Tribunal footage in absolute silence. Veilen's sneer stretched again across the feed, exaggerated by the optic lens distortion, his words sharp, preserved in archival clarity. Let Earth observe their ghosts. The rest of us have systems to govern. Morsque didn't blink. He stood with his arms folded behind his back, the knuckles of one hand whitening beneath the other's grip. The muscles behind his jaw pulsed in rhythm with the replay timestamp. 8 seconds. 9. 10. He played it again. Same line. Same tilt of Veilen's chin. Same undercurrent of contempt that hadn't even attempted to hide itself. He exhaled through his nose, the kind of slow exhale meant to bleed tension. It failed. A voice crackled behind him, low even, filtered through the room's compliance codec. Sir, Council requests a response draft. 5 minutes ago. Morsque didn't turn. There is no response. They want clarity. There is no response. The air pressurized slightly as the chamber door sealed behind the aide. Morsque remained fixed, shoulders square, boots aligned with the embedded channel strip that pulsed faint blue beneath his feet. That strip led to the vault's interface core, sealed, isolated, designed for observational record only. No commands could be issued from here. That was the design. A design he had authored. He tapped the console. The display changed. Archive subroutine, compliance trigger logs, lexicon stability, Plow's resonance scan. He watched them scroll. Centuries of preconditions, fallback lattices, decoupled nodes tied to event qualifiers, so obscure they read more like myths than policies. Plow's HAID 9 shimmered in amber on the left side of the screen. Its activation chain unlit, still dormant, still waiting. He ran his hand across the console surface. The polymer interface warmed beneath his palm, reacting to the static discharge from his skin. His fingerprint initiated, secure access level 3. The Claw's chain opened further, revealing its nested variables. All of them matched. Except one. Trigger state, human dignity. Invalidation during observance status. Confirmation queued condition, unmet. He leaned closer. The final variable flickered. Requirement, human emotional response or a 0.73. He froze. That value was meant to be theoretical. A line item for clause documentation. Earth's internal lattice was built on language, not emotion, or so they'd claimed. Avron straightened, eyes narrowing. The air in the room felt thinner now, not due to oxygen variation, but from the gravity of what he now understood. Earth hadn't built a fail-safe. They'd built a listener. Something inside the lattice architecture didn't just monitor treaties or packet integrity. It watched them, watched him. His breath caught, and then the screen played the clip again. Veilen's voice, "Let Earth observe their ghosts." The words hit him differently this time. Not because of the insult, but because of what followed. Silence, his own silence. He remembered how he stood, how his hands didn't move, how not a muscle shifted. But in that moment, deep behind the walls, below the vault, beyond the command towers, and under the comm relays, something had recorded the tremor beneath his skin. His restraint had been noticed, but not enough. And so he moved, not with fury, not with calculation, just one act, one uncontrollable pulse of suppressed weight. Avron slammed his fist into the center of the console. The sound cracked against the walls like stone breaking under heat. The display wavered. The surface fractured, just once, a spiderweb along the impact line. The veins spread outward, catching the reflection of his face. For a moment, he didn't recognize it. The floor strip beneath his boots turned red. He stared at it, then at the screen. The clause chain updated. Requirement, human emotional response or a 0.73. Met clause had 9. Queued recursive reversion mode. Standby trigger authority. Accepted signature request. Ignored. Morsque's throat dried. He reached for the console again, but the system receded. The display blanked. Only a single word remained, floating across the black surface. Observed. Then that too vanished. The room fell still, but deep beneath Earth's crust, inside a hardened relay chamber, marked obsolete by Concord, decades ago, a buried node flickered once. No sirens, no alerts, just a pulse. Then it went dark. Earth received a silent handshake on a classified frequency that hadn't been activated in 60 years. The message contained no words, only the updated clause status. Aid 9 queued. Elsewhere, inside the vault's outer corridor, a maintenance drone rerouted its own patrol path, altering its loop by 7 meters. No cause registered, no command logged. It moved out of alignment, only slightly, and that was all the confirmation Earth needed. Clause Haid 9 is not theoretical. It was signed by this body. Under Veilen's session, Drav Voshan's voice fractured the stillness like a snapped gavel. The tribunal chamber, ringed in layered lighting tiers and crystalline arch leaves, fell into a murmuring hush, not of dissent, but of disbelief that sounded too soft to be objection and too delayed to be denial. At the central dais, Neth Ulvian stood motionless, his hand still hovering over the tactile archive reader embedded into the tribunal table. The heads-up display above him projected the clause file in rotating syntax shells, each wrapped in archival fonts older than most of the seated delegates. "Pull the ratification log," Ulvian said. The system obeyed. Timestamps bloomed outward in time-lapse formation. Council Cycle 187, Session Tier 3. The original heading, Addendum, Cultural Infrastructure Licensing, Interpretive Exceptions. Clause Designation, Haid 9. Across the legal feed, the clause unfolded in segmental phrasing, written in Terran-rooted legal structure, each word sharpened by formality and embedded historical context. Should any Concord recognized ceremonial structure be invalidated via mockery, breach of observance, or dismissive act targeting Terran dignitaries during sanctioned rites, Earth's infrastructural systems, as licensed, shall default to their final state of interpretive stability. This shall occur without notification, negotiation, or administrative arbitration. Fallback shall occur silently, without declaration. A wave passed through the room, not noise, but a communal shift. Robes stirred, data rods twitched in slow synchrony. A few delegates adjusted their posture without noticing they'd done so. From the upper ledger seats, Counselor Trennick Nor exhaled sharply. No one flagged this during the merge audit. It was ratified cleanly, Voshin replied. 2 abstentions, no opposition, full margin under Veilen's ledger. He expanded the vote trail. Each thumbprint shimmered along the rotating axis of the clause. They flared in soft orange when aligned. One by one, they verified, until the final one. Jernik Veilen's own mark glowed against the archival code, not proxy-signed, not conditional, primary. The clause wasn't hidden, Olvian said. We just never expected dignity to be a trigger. A lower-tier envoy interjected, his voice tight. We were told fallback clauses involved mechanical failures, node saturation, frequency disruptions, not emotional calibration. Voshin keyed in a secondary phrase structure. The clause's inheritance tag expanded, trigger validation, interpretive breach, ceremony tier 1, or higher trigger confirmation. Any verified emotional spike within proximity to observance zone, trigger authority, self-validating through Terra root frame index 4x. This isn't sabotage, he said. This is self-defense protocol encoded into infrastructure logic. But emotion isn't a valid metric in systems law. Someone snapped from the left bay. Olvian's voice cut through. It is when the architecture operates by lexicon. Heads turned. He continued. Earth systems weren't coded in hard command structures. They were written in interpretive reference, meaning their fallback states depend not on data loss, but on the collapse of context. Voshin tapped the display again. A hidden clause layer unveiled itself beneath the root block. A single directive, highlighted in Terran green. In the absence of recognized dignity, compliance must withdraw from external authority. Earth shall remain sole reference. Someone stood too fast. The motion carried an anxious kind of weight, like trying to catch up with meaning long since lost. They've been controlling fallback all this time. No, Voshin corrected. They haven't needed to. He rotated the vote trail downward. We licensed fallback to them. As a courtesy clause, no one thought ceremonial architecture had enforcement weight. A new line appeared on the feed, drawn from a recall node in the Earthside Registry vault. The phrase burned slowly across the screen in amber text. Clause HAID 9 status, queued, trigger validation, confirmed, fallback inheritance, engaged, not pending, not waiting, engaged. The lights above the tribunal dimmed slightly. The overhead core adjusted, compensating for load alignment requests across half the station. No emergency tones activated, no power draw alerts, but something, somewhere was beginning to shift autonomously. Olvian stepped back from the dais. They knew we'd forget. You think they planned this? A triarch from the southern tier asked. No, he replied. They trusted that we wouldn't bother to remember. Voshin rekeyed the archive stream and accessed the Earth-sourced licensing agreement from Halvanar's recovery session. One line stood out among the boilerplate text. Licensing remains functional until dignity is revoked. Revocation, in any form, shall activate reversion. A silence bloomed again, heavier than before. A silence filled with unspoken calculations. The aide beside Olvian finally whispered, "Is this legal?" The Triarch's gaze didn't break from the screen. "No," he said. Then quieter, "It's binding." The phrase returned again on a background loop, simple, understated, cruel in its neutrality. Fallback shall occur silently, without declaration. And now, across the relay nets, fallback was no longer theory. It had begun, not as retribution, not as sabotage, but as legality fulfilled, with no breach to correct. That isn't drift. That's recursion. Fleet Marshal Karik Dole leaned toward the heads-up display hovering just above his command platform, its projection ring flickering against the dim lighting of the Triumvir Vex. The data feed blinked erratically. Concord fleet formation, identifiers washing out line by line, replaced by ID streams written in legacy Earth syntax. Columns of coordinate arrays looped without flagging errors, their symbols elegant, ordered, completely unrecognizable. Realign formation angle by 32 degrees, he said. Manual input. Override satellite calibration. His adjutant didn't move. I already tried. 4 seconds ago. Override denied. Not by encryption. The system said, path exists elsewhere. Karik blinked. Elsewhere. Not here, sir. Not under our sky. The Marshal stared at the stars through the main viewport. Except, they weren't stars. They were placeholders, symbols. All the known markers in the outer vector ring had vanished. Not physically, but from the registry map. Where once his fleet navigated by beacons tied to Concord's route lattice, now a blank tapestry stretched before him. A field of nothing, lit only by raw sensor reflection. He turned to the stellar map layer. Instead of destinations, it displayed echoes, shadows of fleet positions, faded and misaligned. Ghost silhouettes tagged in looping clusters, labeled echo pattern. Earth retained. He looked back at the display. Status on orbital targeting arrays. The sensor chief at the rear responded without looking up. They're targeting us. Karek didn't raise his voice. Define us. I mean the Triumvir Vex, the other cruisers. Friendly tags are misidentified as redundant echoes. The system thinks we're phantoms in violation of anchor registry. On the lower screen, the fleet's defensive umbrella pulsed once, then fragmented into floating symbols. It wasn't shutting down, it was forgetting what to defend. The technician stammered. The array just purged our ident codes from friendlies. Now we're categorized as unverified behavioral overlap. It logged our hull as incompatible with current galactic structure. Karek whispered, "That's not a targeting failure." "No, sir, that's disownment." The tactical officer beside him reached for the fallback console and froze. All fallback commands reroute to origin index 0, which is Earth. In the communications bay, message packets failed to authenticate. Encryption aligned, formatting matched, but the link paths were untraceable. The broadcast logs displayed live synchronization with the old system. Earth's abandoned lattice, not spoofed, not hacked, restored. Fleet markers drifted in the projection field. One vessel broke rank by 6.7 degrees, and didn't correct. Two more did the same. Each auto-navigational system recalibrated without notice, using coordinate guidance that no longer corresponded to Concord's network. Hard reset. Reset everything, Karek snapped. Control nodes don't accept that term anymore, the systems operator said. The instruction isn't invalid. It's just obsolete. Obsolete how? They're speaking a different language now. Not by dialect, by reference. At the outer edge of the display grid, the defense ships guarding Bastion Ridge disappeared from the shared feed, not destroyed, just delisted. The master network no longer saw them. Their signal metadata reflected back onto the mainframe with a new label, unanchored node, suspended reality check. The phrase made no technical sense, and yet the system accepted it without resistance. The deck lights above dimmed again, not from power loss, but because the environmental systems had realigned their day cycle clock based on a deprecated Earth orbital profile. The ship's entire chronometric framework had resynchronized to Terran Standard Time without input. Karek stared at the heads-up overlay. On the display, a blinking phrase now hovered between fleet markers, registry authority. Not found, anchor requested, Earth signature override, rejected. What the hell are they doing? One officer whispered. Karek didn't answer. A tremor passed through the hull, not impact, not propulsion, a psychological tremor. Something in the air felt directionless, not uncertain, abandoned. From across the formation, a warning stream ignited. Collision forecast, 0.4%. Fleet auto avoidance disabled, defaulting to Earth route table 3 alpha. Reclaim the maps, Karek muttered. I want every star chart recompiled from raw telemetry. They already are, someone said. Then why don't they match? Because, the navigation officer whispered. The stars don't know where we are anymore. On the upper command wall, the final Concord anchor map cracked, literally. The central icon, Concord's seal, its founding system in the center of the navigational array, fractured. Not visually, but in alignment. Its orbit skewed against gravitational logic. The pathing vectors drifted apart. The system didn't flag this as an error. It simply accepted the rewrite. Concord, as a place, no longer existed in the language the galaxy had begun to adopt. Karek reached forward and deactivated his console. Then he stood in silence, not in defeat, but in awe of a weapon that required no force, no flame, no warning, just removal. Earth had removed them from the conversation, and the galaxy listened. Self into the local net. Default reference Earth-rooted sequence confirmed. In the Selnar Fleet Watchtower, 8 ships locked weapons for reorientation. Why is the air cycling in 4-second intervals? Assistant Marshal Deck stood inside the environmental regulation vault of Drennis platform, his palms suspended mid-swipe above the primary heads-up display. The station's respiration rhythms had subtly altered, not in pressure, not in composition, but in cadence. It wasn't failing. It was following a pattern no one had programmed in over 6 decades. Above his head, the laser plasma panel refreshed and issued its only update, compliance recorded. No sound, no motion. Just 3 words etched into the upper right corner of every functioning system. In the filtration dome, the water regulators shifted phase mid-process. The molecules weren't being treated, they were being interpreted. The algorithm had abandoned current fluid purity standards and reverted to Earth's oldest command set, its subatomic cleansing rhythm, last used during the final migration wave. "Where's the override?" Deck muttered. The AI didn't reply. Instead, a new message populated the maintenance grid. Terran Waterframe Protocol A8, active. On Catharian Orbital Port, the Customs AI updated its jurisdictional markers. A blue border once labeled Concord Sector, now shimmered with a void glyph. Then it shifted, quietly, without conflict, to pending Terran reference. The station manager blinked twice, stepped back, and tapped her relay for Central Navigation Authority. The system paused. A looping bar replaced the signal arc. She whispered, "It's not rejecting my request. It's waiting." A quarter sector away, aboard the civil transport liner Veilen Chris, the command AI rerouted its flight path without announcement. None of the passengers noticed the trajectory shift until the stars outside their observation panels tilted against the arc of their charts. Inside the pilot alcove, the interface displayed a single input field, no course, no time. Awaiting Terran signature. The flight master leaned forward, scanned for beacon sinks. There were none. Still, the liner moved, obeying a path no local registry contained. On Verdalis Prime, the Council's subterranean archive chamber dimmed without alarm. The root frame system, tied to a fortress of legal precedent, attempted to reassert its priority as the administrative cornerstone of the core systems. The attempt failed. Clause by clause, jurisdiction tags were crossed out, not by brute force, but by interpretive obsolescence. The system ran a recursive logic check and quietly assigned itself secondary designation. Legal clerk Von Dareth stood alone before the towering archive vault, its entire index array pulsing in quiet recitation, compliance recorded. He didn't try to correct it, he simply whispered, "It still recognizes Earth." Elsewhere, on a frontier relay beacon long considered abandoned, the atmospheric control grid came online without notice. Its emissions calibrated instantly to Earth standard climate tolerances, wind pressure adjusted, solar lensing recalibrated. The temperature dropped by 1/2 degree. An agricultural worker stepped outside, stared at the station's dome curve, and whispered, "I didn't authorize anything." Behind him the comms relay clicked once. A notification tagged it in drill. They never fired. The targeting logic flagged each of them as unstable vectors. Their command authority had been recategorized, not as hostile, but as unsupported root. One ship attempted to override. The command failed, not by denial, but by incompatibility. The control feed blinked once, and looped back to a soft standby display, awaiting signature. In civilian homes, power grids dimmed and pulsed gently, forming patterns known only to Terran grid balancing harmonics. Autonomous cleaners shifted their routes, not randomly. With intent, one man in a domestic outpost dropped his meal utensil as the wall interface blinked. He didn't read the phrase aloud. He didn't have to. It had already arrived before him. Before any of them. In the Concord AI archives, an internal purge protocol attempted to eliminate all entries linked to Earth's legal infrastructure. The task failed. Every deletion command generated a recursive flag. Every flag looped back to the archive source, marked cultural exception, non-removable. The AI registered the contradiction and resolved it by recategorizing Concord's own root registry as a subordinate host. On the Council Spire's final floor, where the last functioning strategic war room dimmed to its lowest energy state, the central heads-up feed scrolled through tactical channels now unreadable. Communications redirected toward zero-point fallback nodes, each tethered to Earth's oldest relay frame. And then the broadcast stilled. Only one line remained, compliance recorded. Counselor Veilen stood before the terminal, hands folded behind his back, jaw locked tight. His aide stepped forward. "Sir, there's no data stream anymore." Veilen did not reply. The aide tried again. "There's not even silence." At that moment, every screen in the room dimmed, then turned black. Every display, except one. The central feed faded, revealing a single phrase, projected without source, awaiting Terran's signature. The words did not flicker, they did not command, they simply waited. And across every world, every station, every minor outpost still struggling to maintain identity, systems defaulted, not to allegiance, not to compliance, but to remembrance. Earth had become the only authority still recognized, not through force, not through demand, only because no one else remained valid. And the phrase kept returning, across every channel, to every hand trying to remove it. Compliance recorded. The galaxy had not been conquered, it had agreed. Interpretation resumed. The words arrived quietly, floating through the empty space between Merrick Strahn's fingers, as they hovered above the terminal's delicate keys. He hadn't given an order, hadn't spoken a word since the last system-wide pulse had begun. He couldn't. He didn't need to, not anymore. Relay 0K was active now, the final node, the last Terran infrastructure relay, resurrected after decades of dormancy. On the heads-up display, Earth's laurel seal flickered once in that distinctive pale gold, a small, unobtrusive symbol, yet all-encompassing. The seal pulsed once, then the synchronization field spread outward, wrapping itself around the galaxy like an invisible, yet suffocating blanket. The system recognized it, without hesitation. Earth wasn't just speaking, it was redefining what it meant to exist in this space. Strahn felt the weight of the moment settle like a shadow across the room. It wasn't a violent shift, but there was an inevitability to it, a quiet hum, far more potent than any weapon. Across the galaxy, systems flickered, recalibrated, and fell in line. Some resisted, they always did. Faint ripples of panic surfaced, speckling through different sectors. Automated defenses, once proud, tried to fight it, to override the source of this return. They demanded an anchor, they called for verification. No anchor recognized. The rebellion was brief, a fading heartbeat. The systems continued to realign, unfurling from their root to their extremities, in a sweeping motion that neither required approval nor consent. Those that accepted it, functioned. Those that fought it, vanished. But it wasn't violent. It was as though the world around them simply stopped needing to function according to their old laws. The lights in the council chamber dimmed. Their soft flicker against the cold, polished floors grew dimmer still, until only a single display remained. Above it, a phrase shone in stark contrast to the oppressive darkness, awaiting Terran's signature. The room, now quiet as the empty expanse beyond their reach, remained locked in place. No calls for action, no frantic negotiations, nothing more could be said. They had spoken their words, and now Earth had offered the only response that mattered. It had simply reclaimed what was always its own. Merrick Strahn watched it all unfold, his thoughts steady as the power flooded through the galaxy. It wasn't an act of war, nor was it an act of power, it was an act of return. And yet, the terror still lingered. He wasn't just watching a rebirth, he was watching the undoing of everything he thought he knew about their systems, their alliances. His heart beat faster in his chest. This wasn't a grand victory. It wasn't some final battle they had won. It was quieter, cleaner. It was far more terrifying than anything that had come before. The Council had laughed, mocked Earth in its most vulnerable moment, and now Earth had erased that mockery, not with force, but with the most simple act of all, not participating. They had simply stopped. And the galaxy, helpless and bound to its own foundations, had no choice but to comply. Across 5 systems, the flickering displays became a faint trace of gold, the same subtle laurel seal, glowing faintly, slowly pushing back the shadows, erasing years of dominance from every network, every relay. "We can't stop it," one of the counselors whispered in the back of the chamber, his voice trembling with something more than disbelief. It was the recognition of complete, absolute futility. "No," another voice replied. It was calm, resigned, yet edged with something that could almost be called awe. "We never could." There was no need for military response. There was no need for protocols or negotiations. Earth had never demanded a thing. Instead, It allowed the galaxy to function on its terms. We lost. Another counselor stammered, his breath shallow. He turned to look at the others, the expression in his eyes one of disbelief, confusion, even. But there was no escape, no second chance to rewrite history, no treaty to call upon. The universe was bound, not to power, but to a single silent truth. Earth had always held the foundation, and the galaxy had forgotten. The pulse, the hum, the legacy of Earth's technology was more than a tool, it was the condition of existence. The galaxy had grown complacent in its belief that it could stand apart. But Earth had never been apart. It had been there, quietly watching, quietly waiting. And now, as the systems obeyed the silent signal, they had been reminded. Every system, every satellite, every fragment of this galaxy that once believed it had freed itself from Earth's touch, had to now accept it once again, not as a ruler, but as the necessary condition of functioning life. Every command was simple, every instruction precise. Earth's presence had been a given for so long that the galaxy had stopped questioning its foundational role. But as the final phrase rippled across every surviving relay, Merrick Strawn felt his chest tighten. He no longer saw victory in the soft glow of Earth's emblem. He saw an inevitable truth. And that truth echoed silently, but relentlessly. Compliance recorded. No one resisted now. No one dared. For the first time Earth spoke, not with fury, not with arms, but with quiet certainty, and the galaxy listened. No one would ever forget the quiet terror of that truth.